in order to prop it up? Well, good question. There's another question you never get asked. Never gets brought up, no mention of it at all. The second thing is that the Fed, in fact, controls the supply of money in the United States. It can increase the supply of money, it can decrease the supply of money. It typically tends to do the former. Typically tends to pump money into the economy, and it pumps it in, typically not so much by printing it, as it does by just through electronic credits to various banks. But the point is, the Fed can increase and decrease the supply of money, and the Fed can indirectly influence interest rates too. So therefore, the Fed is based on the idea that when it comes to money and interest rates, we need central planning. We can't have a free market in these things. So in other words, people who would all agree that it would be a disaster if the government produced food or shoes or frisbees or hats, because central planning of these things would be a disaster, will turn around and say, however, when it comes to the very lifeblood of the economy, money and interest rates, well, there we need a Soviet commissar, of course, to oversee it. And again, no, is this even debate? Is it even on the table? No discussion of it at all. Now, in fact, to add insult to injury, not only is the Fed not really on the table for discussion, because all of respectable opinion, and by the way, respectable opinion are the people who told us our economy is in great shape, it's more robust than ever, the housing bubble isn't even a bubble, it's real factors behind this housing boom. So you would think that the conventional wisdom would have suffered a little bit in the wake of the crisis, but these are the ones who are keeping this off the table. It's not only that we can't discuss it, it's that when the Fed does come up, just as a matter of news, just reporting the news, the Fed chairman, at least for years, has been portrayed as this godlike figure of superhuman intelligence that we mere mortals can't begin to comprehend the centrality of this figure to our economy. So Alan Greenspan, for example, whose tenure spanned nearly 2 decades, beginning in the late 80s, was referred to by the New York Times in its typical toadying totalitarian fashion as, quote, the infallible maestro of our financial system. Now, no free people should have to endure the indignity of being told that one guy, some schmuck with big glasses, is the infallible maestro of the financial system. I mean, what's pathetic? Well then, but here's my favorite. I like this quotation. This is from Bob Woodward, supposedly the anti-establishment reporter. He's going to get to the bottom of it. Bob Woodward writes in his book, Maestro, he says, in The Wizard of Oz, I mean, right away, this is off to a bad start. In The Wizard of Oz, when the man behind the curtain emerges, we are let down. With Greenspan, we find comfort. Isn't that just creepy? I mean, regardless if you agree with me, this is an important issue. This is creepy. This is not normal. But maybe the most outrageous example was as follows. Some of you, I suppose, probably have to suffer through reading once in a while the New Republic magazine. The New Republic had a journalist years ago in the 1990s named Stephen Glass. I don't know if any of you remember this guy. Stephen Glass had this ability to write original, I mean seriously original, fascinating stories on a wide array of subjects. And other reporters were saying, why did I not get this story? How come Stephen Glass got it, and I didn't even know what was going on? Anybody know why Stephen Glass got all these stories?
He made them up!
He made them up! That's how you get them. He just invented the stories. So one of them I liked, and they made a movie about this, by the way, called Shattered Glass. And I forget which actor it is, but one of the guys who does one of the voices in The Simpsons, some of The Simpsons voices, is in it. It's an excellent movie, Shattered Glass. But anyway, one of the phony stories was about a computer hacker who was maybe 16 years old, just a kid really, who was such a good hacker that business firms would preemptively approach him and beg him not to hack into their systems. And they would offer him money and cars and whatever he asked for, and he'd just sit there and make his demands, and they would just give him a fascinating story, right? Totally made up. There's no such thing. There was no such story. But anyway, the relevance of this is that Stephen Glass made up a story that a group of Wall Street executives had built a little shrine to Alan Greenspan with his image there and some flowers and candles, and they would all meet together and meditate in front of him. Now, it's true that he made up that story. story. But why did nobody notice that that was a made-up story? So that's the type of bizarre, superstitious reverence that Americans have been taught to have for this man. So what I want to do is talk about something that I know if you've never heard this before, and I say it, you're going to think, all right, now this, I knew this was going to get bad, and I've got to get out of it, but I promise you it isn't. I want to tell you something about something called Austrian business cycle theory. Now hold your applause, please. As a matter of fact, that's actually a real joke, because when I was speaking in Minneapolis at Ron Paul's Rally for the Republic, you know, you make a speech and you sort of know what your applause lines are going to be. And, you know, you pause for a second, you wait for the applause, you move on. Well, I'm in the middle of giving this speech and I say, oh, you know, by the way, it's interesting that a lot of financial analysts these days are interested in Austrian business cycle theory. And the place, this has got 10,000 people in it, the Target Center of Minneapolis, erupts in cheers. I thought, I mean, this has been like the dorkiest people in the whole country. This event. But I was very glad because people should know about this. Well, the reason I bring it up is that this theory, I think, gives us the best explanation as to what happened to us. And it is not a coincidence that people who subscribe to this theory are the ones who for years have been warning about precisely what we are experiencing now. That's no mere coincidence. It's because the theory, in my judgment, is correct. And Austrian business cycle theory, in fact, won the Nobel Prize for economist F.A. Hayek in 1974. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything because we know that some, you know, more mentally challenged people have won the Nobel Prize. So it doesn't always mean something, but it is significant when you win the Nobel Prize for saying something that really the Nobel Prize establishment doesn't really want to hear. I mean, there's a close relationship between the Swedish central bank and the Nobel Prize. So they don't really want to hear the central bank is crummy and, you know, disrupts the economy, but yet Hayek won the Nobel Prize for arguing that. Now, we call it Austrian business cycle theory not because it describes business cycles that occur in Austria, but because it belongs to, it's a subset of something called Austrian economics, or the Austrian school of economics. It is simply a school of thought, like the Chicago School, for example. It's not an actual place. There are probably more Austrian economists or people working in this tradition in the United States than there are in Austria. But all the same, the Austrian School of Economics is the oldest continuously existing school of economic thought in the world. It is right now the smallest such school, but it is also the fastest growing, particularly under the because I think these days people are looking for answers, and they really don't want to hear the answers that people who were totally blindsided by the economic crisis have to offer. They'd like to hear from people who actually predicted it. And again, people who belong to the Austrian school predicted the economic crisis not because they've got a crystal ball or they're using a Ouija board or something. It's because they have the right tools necessary to understand and predict these things. Now, first of all, when I say business cycle, I'm simply referring to this phenomenon that we're all familiar with, in which the economy will go through a period in which it's doing very well, everything's booming, and then we'll have a period in which, such as right now, things are doing not quite so well, and then we go back up and down, and so we move, and it's in a cycle, and so we use this term business cycle. Now, business cycle theory has advanced very slowly and not very impressively in the economics profession at large over the course of the 20th century. If you pick up a typical textbook in economics, it's very common you won't find any particular section on business cycles. It'll be spread out, you know. If you were to look for the 9 mentions in your 1,000-page book of business cycle theory, they might not add up to a page or page and a half. So it's very little. And the sort of customary view is, you know, why? You ask the question, why does the economy do this? Why does it do? I mean, that is a question that needs to be asked.